And we're recording.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. I'm Alan Stevens, as many of you will probably know, and it's a great pleasure to host this. You're not going to be hearing very much from me at all. You're going to be hearing mostly from Celine. So let me introduce Celine Morin, who's going to be running the session for us today. I've known Celine for quite a while. She is the most amazingly healthy person on the planet. And what she's going to do is to help you in terms of how you can run a healthy lifestyle as a speaker, because we have a fairly difficult lifestyle at times, and Celine is an expert on making sure that we're properly healthy in order to do what we do, and that we can keep doing it for as long as possible. So, Celine, I'll pass it over to you for some of your initial thoughts.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And with that kind of accolade, I do feel like there's some pressure. I appreciate that, though. And it's so true. I certainly sometimes wonder how, if I didn't have some of the strategies that I use, how I'd manage just with the pace that so many of us as speakers on the road face, and the challenges around always, or even not always, most of the time being able to make good choices. And I know for a fact that I definitely show up better, not just off the stage, but certainly on the stage when I'm doing some of the fundamental things as much as possible. So today, I would like us to take a look and revisit, and it often is a revisit, the fundamentals, because a lot of what I teach is not rocket science. We know this, but what we're seeing is that common knowledge is certainly not common practice. So, I'm working with more and more individuals, as I'm sure Sue will know, that are facing high stress levels, poor lifestyle choices, not sleeping enough, not moving around enough, not eating enough. And so we have mental health issues. We have the tsunami in healthcare around chronic lifestyle disease like diabetes and heart disease and hypertension. And speakers aren't immune to that. So it's incredibly, I think, powerful to take this time to relook. And we're going to benchmark, because I'm going to take us through a framework that I've used for a very long time, that we can actually measure where we're at. Because if we want to make any kind of change, we absolutely need to know where we're at, and then we can set a goal as to move forward. So I've come prepared, but I'd like to know, by those of you that are here on the call, is there any particular topic or question or a theme around well-being that you would like us to address to ensure that this hour is time well spent? So you can either unmute yourself and give me a comment, or add something in the chat. Anybody have a question or a topic on mind that they would like addressed?
I think for me, the key one's energy.
And when you say energy, do you mean physical energy? So sustaining high energy levels?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there a particular time of day that you need that?
Not really. No, it can be, it comes and goes on its own, I think.
Okay, great. Because that's actually one of the key themes that I wanted to bring across. So I'm sure we'll answer that question. Thank you, Sue. Anybody else?
Oh, my cat wants to join you now as well.
Oh, hello. Well, people apparently who have pets do live longer.
Oh, good.
So good going.
I've noticed that, Phil, you've just popped something in the chat box there. So if you don't mind me reading that out, so that Celine's aware of it, she doesn't have time to look at it. That's energy on the road, hotels overseas especially. And I think that's something I would endorse. And Celine and I talked before this call about a number of issues, and that was certainly one that came up for me too.
Okay, great. Then I will definitely weave that in. And if there isn't another comment, Barbara, welcome. It's lovely to have you here.
Sorry, I was a bit late. I was on a phone call, and I suddenly realised it's after 5:30. So
no problem. You're in the right place at the right time. Thank you for being here. So in terms of sustaining our energy, what definitely helps is to sustain the chemistry that supports that. And so as I say that, I'm going to share my desktop. There we go. Can you see a slide that says performance chemistry? Alan, can you check that?
I can, absolutely.
Great. And because I'm not as skilled at Zoom as Terry Brox is as yet, can you see the performance chemistry slide and still see us? Because I can see your faces.
Yeah, you're doing a fine job, Celine. It works perfectly.
Outstanding. Yeah, great. So performance chemistry is about understanding some of the basic chemistry that we should have in place to support our well-being. And I'm going to go through, I've mentioned a framework, and that's the how. So if we look at, I'm sure that you're familiar with Simon Sinek and his approach around starting with why. And I'm going to look at the how. We're going to use the Wellculator framework to do that. And the what will be all the additional tips and techniques and strategies that I can share. And on that note, what I know is the more I do this work, the more the wisdom is always in the room. And when it comes to well-being, there's certainly no one size fits all. We are all individual. And as such, there are general guidelines that we see generally seem to work for most of us, but we're also individual. And so I'm going to reiterate at several points that you don't just take on an approach because it happens to come from a best-selling book or because a colleague did it or a client. Definitely get as much data about yourself as you can, and then implement things in a way that gives you feedback and you make sure that it works for you and your lifestyle. That's incredibly key to me, because we can have all this theory, but what's really important is that it's practical and you're able to sustain it, especially if you are, for instance, on the road or traveling overseas and such as already come up. But before we even go one step further into the how and the what, I want to consider the why. I'll never forget Nigel Risner, who was one of the very first professional speakers that I met way back in the day. And he said, once you have a strong enough reason why, you'll always find a how. So having a strong sense of purpose, especially around something as emotive as well-being, is key. So I'm going to share my 3 top reasons for why this topic is important for me and why I make an effort to look after my well-being. And then I'd love to know if you have another reason why you've invested the time to be here now, so it must be a topic that is of interest to you, or why you consider or look after your well-being in general. For me, the first thing is that I tap into flow and productivity when I look after myself. I know that I function and show up at my best, not just on the stage, but certainly when I'm running my business, when I'm traveling, when I'm doing other things around life, when I've had enough sleep, when I hydrate, when I watch more or less what I'm eating without being too extreme. So some of you will know that I'm French by heritage, even though I was brought up in South Africa. Both my parents come from the Champagne region in France, and that's impacted the way that I approach food and well-being. So for me, I've never been on a diet. My family are all about, well, balance and pleasure, and there's a sense of quality over quantity. And for me, that works. And I know that when I do those things, I'm able to show up at my best. So that's a really strong, compelling reason why. And another reason, and this is especially for you, Sue, is that when I manage my well-being and I do the fundamentals to support the best kind of chemistry, I'm able to own the title CEO. And in this context of well-being, that stands for Chief Energy Officer. And it's not just physical energy, because for me, what's also important is to be able to harness or leverage emotional and mental energy on demand. I'm sure you all know what it's like. You're running back-to-back workshops, you're incredibly tired, you're traveling, you get to a hotel late at night, and you've got a whole wad of unread emails that you know you need to get through. You don't need physical energy to do that, but you certainly need to be able to concentrate and focus and tap into mental energy. And that is so much easier when you look after your well-being. And that's one of the strong reasons why it's important for me. And then I definitely want to live a long, healthy life. I have this ideal of celebrating my 100th birthday. And when we look at trends in well-being, and when we listen to futurists, we absolutely know that this is possible. I, however, would like to celebrate my 100th birthday or more with this, as if I was perhaps living in one of the blue zones. Is anybody familiar with the blue zones? No. So the blue zones are places like Okinawa in Japan, Sardinia, Costa Rica, where we see high concentrations of people living longer, so reaching 100, perhaps 110, but they're reaching that age with quality of life in their quantity of years. So they don't have a chronic disease like diabetes, they don't have mental health issues like Alzheimer's. So those are my 3 compelling reasons why this is actually something that I bother with, because it takes effort, right? It's not easy. If well-being was a question of intelligence, we would see a lot more of us, not just speakers, but our clients that we work with, our audiences. People would be healthier, fitter, slimmer, but we aren't. And it's because it's much more complex. We have to consider behavior, cognitive biases, emotion, and I'm going to touch on that before we wrap up this call, share some of the behavior change that I've seen works for me and my audiences, and perhaps you could use to help you create some habits that will stick. So anybody want to share a reason why well-being is important to them? Why did you show up today on this call?
I'll kick off because it's all we've got. this may be rather cliched, but the thing about it doesn't matter how rich you are, but if you haven't got good health, then you might find you're in a position where actually, however rich you are, you can't buy yourself good health.
Yeah.
Touch wood, I've had a good run so far, but there's people I know have not been as either lucky as me in terms of some diseases and indeed mental well-being.
Yeah.
And things. And my perception, rightly or wrongly, is that this is substantially about habit rather than anything else. And I found it interesting what you said, Selene, as well, as you've never been on a diet. And I can imagine that, but having known you recently, I know what energy you've got and things. So that's got to be about habit.
And you're spot on. Our greatest wealth is really our health. And most people give up their health while they're building wealth, right? And as speakers, we certainly can fall into that trap. So thank you for that. Thank you. So I'd like to ask you 2 questions to consider as we go into, or just before we go into the actual what and how. Take a moment to consider this. Of all the things that are valuable or important to you, which one, just one, is worth being well for? And perhaps raise your hand if you can think of one thing that is important to you that is worth being well for. All right. And this is a question, if we have time, I suspect because we are a bunch of speakers, we might not. So depending on how interactive we get, this is a lovely question to ponder over. And actually what I'll do is I'll set my timer for 30 seconds. I'll ask the question, and even those that then watch the recording, it's a valuable question just to think about because it's so unique and so different to each of us. So here's the question, and I'll set my timer for half a minute. If anything were possible, what would your well-being look like? If anything were possible, what would your well-being look like? And that could be physical well-being, emotional well-being, and or mental well-being. So take the next half a minute to reflect on what that would be for you.
Who said that?
There's my timer. Would anybody like to share in 30 seconds or less? If you're comfortable to share what kind of image came up for you. If not, we'll move on.
Listen, I'm happy to share. Sorry, if I'm hogging this, tell me to shut up.
No.
But on the physical one,
yeah,
I've got some key performance indicators because you would expect me to have key performance indicators. So I've got to keep my cholesterol below 5 because some years ago it was not, and under medical advice, I've got to keep it below that. I did have a blood test 2 weeks ago. It's now 4.7. So there's a KPI on the physical one, and I think on the physical side of these things, in terms of what it looked like, it's sometimes I find these easier to measure than the other 2.
Yes.
As well. I think the mentally thing for me is how long you can keep yourself in the zone, to use the sporting analogy. And I know you can't do that 100% of the time, but it's keeping yourself in the zone. And the emotional one, tricky as well. I guess it's difficult to do that like 100% of the time because everyone has ups and downs, and sometimes we share these with other people and to make so they're having their up and we bring our down along to them to make them feel bad and stuff. But it's about awareness of others.
And Phil, it's absolutely that. It's awareness. And generally, all what I'm talking about and the work that I do is about awareness, which then helps us make different choices should we choose to. So on that note of awareness, we're going to work through, well, if you've come across flow, then you might have come across the concept of the performance pyramid. Tony Schwartz first wrote about this when he wrote the book, The Corporate Athlete. And he looked at different dimensions of well-being, so physical, emotional, mental, and then what's often referred to as meaning or spiritual. And today we're going to take a look at that base of the pyramid. So what are the physical things we should have in place? Because we know that that really does then support and make it easier for us to show up at our best, whatever that may look like for you, be it emotionally or mentally. And so you're going to get a chance to answer this question. If your body were to give you a score, what would it be? Before we wrap up, we're going to go through the 10 points and you'll be able to score yourself out of 10. And that will be a piece of awareness that you can then choose to potentially make a choice on if you would like. So the framework I'm going to take you through is called the Wellculator, which takes a look at the fundamentals, as I mentioned, that often become a bit like background noise. They become easy to ignore. So the first question on the Wellculator is this: how would you answer it? Do you have a refueling strategy that sustains your energy levels? So I come across this a lot, not just, I see it with speakers, and I certainly see it with a lot of my clients, that there's morning mayhem. So for whatever reason, you may be hitting the snooze button, or there's just kids and pets and school runs to take care of. You may be traveling, you might not be sleeping well because you're in a hotel, so you've been up between 2 and 4 a.m., so you're tired. You end up then grabbing whatever you can on the go. You might have back-to-back meetings, or you're in a long conference presenting training or keynotes. So perhaps there's more coffee. A lot of people skip lunch, or when they have lunch, it's generally eaten quite quickly on the go, and generally carbohydrate based. Come the afternoon, when we have a bit of an energy slump, a lot of us might reach for something. Something might be salty or sweet. And then come the evening, most people I see are so famished that they end up eating a lot more than they need. And perhaps there's some wine or a pint of beer and a chocolate that like bookends that. So I don't know if you can anybody resonate with an aspect of what I've just shown? Anyone on the call? I see a few nods. Okay. So whether it's perhaps skipping breakfast, or having quick meals on the go, or having too much to eat too late at night, the impact on our performance is related to the fact that everything that we eat and drink has an almost immediate effect on our blood glucose levels, which is where a lot of our primary source of energy comes from. And stabilizing our blood glucose is one of the most fundamental steps to help stabilizing our energy levels overall, and to owning that title, Chief Energy Officer. And this is where finding the right strategy that works for you can work well. I'm going to share what I do. And I don't do this all the time, hey guys. I know it's so easy. Us as speakers, we're always seen as the expert in that particular field. But what I know is that when I do what I know my body and my mind needs to be at its best 80% of the time, I still get great results. You don't have to be doing this 100% of the time. So what works generally for me is when I eat breakfast, and this is where traveling and eating has become a little bit more challenging, because I've had to perhaps look after myself by traveling with food. So I always try and have some protein and fiber in the morning. So if you think of your breakfast this morning, is anybody happy to share what they had for breakfast this Monday morning?
Porridge.
Porridge on its own, with anything else?
With banana and some seeds.
Nice. So you got a combination there of fiber and a bit of like plant protein coming from the seeds. Sue, did you have anything different?
Toast. Just toast. So,
what kind of toast?
well, I suppose
toast is bad?
A couple of slices of, it was white this morning, sometimes it's brown, with a bit of butter and jam.
Okay, so not much fiber, not much protein. So
no, not so great this morning.
Then I find what works for me is I keep snacks on me. So when I'm traveling, in my laptop bag, in my travel bag, in my desk drawer, and this I don't do every day, because I certainly don't have the time to. So once a month, I've got like some of my favorite suppliers, and I jump online when I'm doing my month-end accounts. I use that as a trigger, and I'll speak about how important it is to have triggers and cues to help us implement new behaviors. And I use that to then order the favorite kind of combos that I like. Like I love walnuts and dried apricots, for instance. I love fresh apple with any kind of nut butter. And you can see there that the combination is the same as what I recommended for breakfast: some protein and some fiber. And if anybody watching this, whether it's now or the recording, if you would like specific ideas, you're welcome to contact me and I'll send you snack list or some breakfast recipes, because yeah, there's so many choices that we can be doing. And then lunch, for me, the one thing I try and do is, because I eat quite quickly, is I try and eat away from my computer and take 15 to 20 minutes to eat. There's some science to show that we need that amount of time in order to allow our stomach to stretch and release pepsin that goes up to the appetite center and says, thank you, I've had enough to eat. And when we're distracted, be it in front of a computer doing a proposal for a client, or rushing, or perhaps even eating on the train while we're on social media and engaging with other things, it's easier for us to eat more than we need and to eat very fast. So eating mindfully can help. And then in the afternoons, often, I know for myself and a lot of my clients that we aren't hungry. We're looking for an energy boost. But what could help is to either get up and stretch and smile at someone, or to have some water, because a lot of us tend to perhaps not hydrate enough, or to just get some movement, or perhaps some fresh air. And by doing these small things, it makes it easier if you regulate your blood glucose in the day, which you will if you're having a little bit more consistent meals and including fiber and protein. It makes it easier to then not overeat in the evening, regardless of what kind of choice you're having. And then what I try to do myself is, at the end of the day, I take 5 or 10 minutes. One of the things to set myself up for success the next day, one of the things I've been doing since the beginning of the year is I boil the kettle at night. I've got a plunger that I don't use for coffee. I put in a tea bag, maybe mint or red bush, and then I top that up with hot water and I leave it next to the kettle to infuse overnight. What happens in the morning when I come into the kitchen to make my coffee is I see the water, and it's a visual cue, insight in mind, and I drink probably half of that, so maybe close to a pint. So I'm hydrating first thing in the morning, and then I'm enjoying my cup of coffee. So is there something that you could do at the end of the day that doesn't take a lot of time, that sets you up for some kind of success the next day? I know that when I want to go for a walk or exercise, I'll sometimes put my exercise clothes next to the bed on the floor, so that in the morning when I wake up, I see it. And once again, it's the behavioral nudge is right there. You could also do things like switch your phone off. I hope that we're going to chat about sleep in a moment. And having a digital detox or a break away from these devices is incredibly important. And using the evenings in order to be able to do that can help a lot too. So this is one way to set up our environment. What I know as a speaker, and I'm sure that you'll agree, that when you're going to events and you're in conference rooms or with clients, the food choices are not ideal. They're generally very beige. That's the only color. And there's definitely no sight of like nuts and proteins and things like that. So stocking up your environment is key. And for that, I would recommend once a month that you shop for the right kind of snacks that you enjoy, then drop them in your environment, and then remember to stop and have them. Because for most of the people I come across, I find that unlike the French, for instance, and even now that's starting to change, the French generally stop for lunch and then they stop and they have a proper dinner. We tend to be much more on the run. And so the concept of healthy snacking could be helpful. There's another strategy that I've been doing, and I'm sure a lot of speakers have, and that is intermittent fasting. Has anybody on the call experimented with intermittent fasting?
No.
No.
Is this the 5+2 thing?
Yes. Yeah, the 5-2. So that was Michael Mosley who wrote the book on the 5-2 diet. And I don't know why it's called
which I haven't done, I will confess.
Okay, because it's not really a diet. What I find of all the diet programs out there, it definitely is one that is grounded, has a lot of science to support that it can help with potentially with longevity and with weight loss in a way that's very balanced and sustainable. So the idea is you take 2 days in the week. They don't need to be consecutive. In fact, it's Michael Mosley in his book recommends that they are not consecutive. So it would be, say, a Monday and a Thursday. And then I'm just going to pause there because I've realized that we've lost Alan. And I hope he's not waiting for me to let him back in. I don't think so. I'm not sure. I just wanted to check that. So then you eat within a 8 to 10 hour window. So you would have your meal, say a midday meal at midday or a little bit earlier, and then finish eating within 8 to 10 hours so that you have a big gap of say 16 hours where you don't eat. I didn't think I would enjoy it, but I started doing it. And when I travel as much as I do, and I don't know about you, you end up eating much more than you usually would, because you're with clients for dinner. Yeah, I can see you nodding. You're having client lunches. I don't know. When I speak, you know,
Buffets.
I'm a little bit more nervous, and I find that I just eat more.
Mm.
So intermittent fasting has helped me to regulate my weight and energy levels. And you know, when I do it is when my client books me into like a Premier Inn, where I know that there's not going to be great room service. I'll then arrive at the hotel prepared to maybe have a herbal tea or two, and not eat my evening meal if I'm not with my client. And then the next morning I stretch. Well, I don't have breakfast. I'll have perhaps a coffee, and then I'll only eat at lunchtime with the client, or maybe have a snack that I brought along myself late morning. So I'd recommend the 5-2 diet is a good book to start if you're interested in intermittent fasting. Another resource, I'm going to make a note of this so that I can add it, is James Clear, who's the author of Atomic Habits, has written a short article on intermittent fasting, which I found incredibly valuable. And I'll share the link to that along with this recording. This next question is important. Think of your day today. And I'd like you to, in your mind, think of breakfast, your snack, perhaps think about what you're intending to eat if you are going to eat later, and pull together all the colorful foods, the fresh produce. And by color, I don't mean wine gums or jelly tots. So fruits, salads, and how many, if you pull together all the colorful foods that you've had, how many tennis ball portions could you pull together? Show me using your fingers. How many tennis ball portions of colorful food? So we've got 5.5, 6. That's good. That's really good.
Are you asking, sorry, how many different colors?
No, I'm asking how many portions. And a portion is the size of a tennis ball, so, or about my fistful, or your fist. For now, it doesn't matter the color. How many portions of colorful foods, of vegetables? So let's say an apple would be a portion. A bowl of soup might end up being 3 portions because you use quite a bit of vegetables in a soup. I had a salad for lunch, which was actually, I would say, 4 tennis ball portions because I had cabbage and peppers and carrots and leaves in that.
Okay, so your question was how many are in our dinner this evening? Is that it? Or during the day?
In your day. But don't include your evening meal, because you might, as you've just said, consider having some color.
Okay.
No. Yeah, I think I'll do 5.
Okay. So
would this count as half a tennis ball?
Yes, that would, because it's a baby one. Yes.
Sorry, I'm just having a little snack here when I'm talking.
Please go for it.
Okay.
Done that. Yeah.
So 5 should be your minimum. If you really want to be a high-performing, show up at your best, fully vitalized, live longer speaker, you really want to be aiming for like 8 or 10. So when we look at those blue zones that I mentioned earlier, where people are reaching, they're becoming centenarians or super centenarians and living long, healthy lives. Yes, there's a strong sense of community and belonging, which is key. And that's something I'm not going to talk about today. That's Sue, your expertise around mental and emotional well-being. So there's a strong sense of community. But one of the other common factors is that they eat a plant-based diet that ranges from 8 to 12 portions a day. So if you want to benefit from these foods, it is important to eat like an artist. And eating like an artist means that you bring in, and here to answer your question, Barbara, is to bring in lots of color. The more variety you can have, the better. Because for instance, orange type fruits and vegetables will have beta carotene. Red vegetables and fruits will have lycopene. Green will have chlorophyll. So the more you can expose yourself to a rainbow of color, the better. These foods are low in calories, bonus if you're wanting to fill up and stay full and lose weight. They're high in fiber, which is incredibly good for your gut. And they're also very, very good for the brain. There was a Harvard medical report that said, here are the 6 top things you can do for brain fitness. And the first step was not learn a new language or do Sudoku puzzles. It was eat a plant-based diet. And I've mentioned that these foods, by the nature of their micronutrient profile, the vitamins, the phytonutrients that we find in them, and the fiber, they're incredibly good for your gut. And I'm sure, have you heard anything about gut health and how your gut relates to the rest of your well-being? Just lift your hand if you have. Have you heard of probiotics, microbiome, the gut being the second brain? So that topic alone, we could speak on for an hour. All I wanted to do was share one story and share my 2 top tips for trying to make sure that you have a really good, or you support as best gut health as you can. My mother in her early 20s went through quite a stressful period. It was just after my mom and dad moved to South Africa from France. And her skin flared up and she got a very severe form of psoriasis. And to treat the psoriasis for the rest of her life, her doctor would generally give her a corticosteroid, which was very dangerous for her liver and kidneys. So it was highly regulated. Anyway, fast forward to the age of about 67, which was 4 years ago. My mom went through a very stressful period again, and her skin was the worst it's ever been. I have a picture here where you can see, I mean, for the first time, it was coming up her neck and it was highly calloused and it was on her eyes and she had some bleeding. Anyway, she was not feeling good at all. And the doctors understandably did not want to give her more of the corticosteroid treatment. So it's interesting this, because there's a personal vulnerable share here. I hadn't been living at home for many, many years by this time. And I don't know if you find, whatever your area of expertise is that you're never quite a prophet in your own home. So even though I'm a dietitian and nutritionist, and you know, I told my mom what was right, I wasn't there to watch her. And I don't know, I guess she wasn't paying as much attention as I would have liked her to. But she got to this point where she was prepared to do anything. And she went to a doctor who spent an hour with her. So it was a doctor that practices functional medicine or integrative medicine. And those are trends now in general practice that we're seeing, where doctors no longer just treat symptoms, but they actually spend enough time with the patient, asking them about their stress levels, their diet. My mom in this case was asked about her stress and her digestion. So my mom's always had quite severe constipation. And the doctor was like, you know, can we look at a little bit of your stress and the constipation? So for the next 3 months, my mom ate a lot more colorful food, so boosted her fiber intake. She also took a probiotic. So she put back some of the good bacteria, and she started incorporating a little bit of stress management and tried not to eat as much sugar. I mean, she was still French and she still drank red wine. The results though, within 4 months, her skin cleared, as you can see on the screen, and it's been 4 years and she still manages her skin only when she manages her gut health. Oh, and the constipation cleared. So if she's eating a lot of fiber and colorful foods, and every now and again she takes a boost of probiotics because her gut seems to need it. And I'm not suggesting that everyone watching this goes out and takes probiotics. What I certainly am suggesting is that whether you have a skin condition, a mood disorder, because there's a lot of research now, especially Dr. Gabor Mate, linking gut health to the mind. If you have an inflammatory-based condition, diabetes, high cholesterol, Phil, you mentioned that, there is a lot of research to show that by supporting good gut health, you can potentially help any of those conditions. So I always recommend, if there's an issue, speak to a nutritionist or a dietitian or read up on the topic and see what you can to support good gut health. A good place to start though is by eating more color. And this is one of the tips I was going to share with you. So whether I am at a client buffet or a conference venue or a hotel, I always eat color first. So as a starter, I try and choose a colorful option, or I put color on my plate first. Why do you think I say that? What happens if you go and dish up, I don't know, what would you have? The chicken and rice, the spaghetti bolognese. We know that if you put the other food on first, you're less likely to have space for the colorful stuff. So I find this one strategy, I mean, last week I was in 2 different hotels and it wasn't easy, but I followed my advice and I ordered a salad-based starter and a soup starter the second time, and it definitely made it easier for me not to wipe out the bread basket that came with the meal. So adding the color on first is certainly easier, it does help. And then experimenting with recipes. Once a month, I get a Mindful Chef box. Has anybody tried one of those suppliers like Gusto? Hello Chef?
Yeah, Hello Fresh.
Hello Fresh, thank you. And Mindful Chef, and there's Able and Cole. There's quite a few that drop off a box with all the ingredients that you need and a funky recipe that generally takes 15 or 20 minutes that incorporates color. And what I like about those is that they sometimes teach you things about foods that you're not used to eating. Because we can get caught up in a comfort zone and end up eating the same kinds of foods and the same kind of meals. And by adding variety, can also make it more exciting to bring this to life. So I spent a little bit more time on the first two because the first 2 points on the Wellculator, because nutrition is a passion of mine, and I know what a difference it can make to managing your physical energy. So we've looked at, have you got some kind of strategic refueling approach to the way that you eat? We've looked at, do you eat like an artist? So are you including enough color? I've also touched on how you eat. So not just what you eat, but how you eat. So do you practice mindful eating? That means ideally, most of your meals, you should eat, you should step away from your computer, step away from the television, and actually eat for 15 to 20 minutes. And then there's other things like chewing properly, perhaps letting your fork and knife go and actually eating at a table. It's quite distressing when we look at the research showing how few British families are actually eating at a dinner table, that they often sit in front of the telly. And that's, it's not just about the food and digesting and chewing, it's also about the social connection, which is key. I've spoken about hydrating. I always like to give people, though, something to measure. So how do you know if you're drinking enough water? Here's a quick formula. And it's easy to use if you think of your weight in kilograms. So we should have 1 glass of water per 10 kilograms that we weigh. So glass being about 250 mils. So 1 glass of water per 10 kilograms that you weigh. So someone who's quite large, who maybe weighs close to 100 kilos, would need more than somebody who's smaller and weighs maybe 60. And that should be a baseline. This is the one thing I struggle with when I'm on the road. And because I enjoy coffee, and I'm probably going to have 2 cups of coffee a day, maybe 3, I try not to have more than 2, is I alternate my coffees or I always have water with my coffee. So a bit like if we went to an Italian or a Greek coffee shop and we ordered coffee, we would get probably a short coffee, right? Rather than a tall milkshake type coffee, as we would often find at coffee outlets now. And it would be served with water. What if you don't? What if you don't hydrate? Anybody have anything happen? Because I have 2 out of 3 things that happen to me.
I get hungry.
Yeah, I get hungry and hangry if I haven't regulated my blood glucose. Yeah. I get a very particular headache. It's like this brain fog at the front of my brain. And then I know I've only had my 2 cups of coffee and it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon and I haven't had anything to drink. And I sometimes feel my energy drop. So professional athletes definitely understand the importance of hydrating. And as corporate speaking athletes, we can use that too. And then along with talking about hydrating, what's also important is to consider coffee. Do I have coffee or tea drinkers in the room? Raise your right hand if you're a coffee drinker. Tea or both? Okay. So I know quite a few speakers who actually don't drink coffee before they present. Why is that?
Stimulant.
Yeah, and hopefully you're feeling a little bit of adrenaline before you speak. I've always said that if I stop feeling nervous or a little anxious before I speak, that I would quit speaking, because to me that's important, because I need that to channel that to really show up at my best. And if you have perhaps coffee, it could, I know I already speak fast, and when I do have 1 or 2 cups of coffee before a workshop, I have to actively work at slowing down my pace. So that may be a good strategy for you. And then to also consider, coffee could be impacting your sleep. So we know that coffee has a half-life generally of 6 hours. For someone like me, I've done some tests in terms of my nutrigenomics. So we can actually look at your genetics today and get very personal advice around what kind of foods are good for you, what kind of supplements, what kind of exercise. And one of the things I've been told is that I really don't metabolize caffeine or alcohol well. So it lasts for a long time in my system. And so I try and have my last cup of coffee by midday or 1 o'clock, knowing that even by midnight, a quarter of that caffeine could still be in my system.
But Celine, one of the things I read somewhere, can't remember where, sorry, I don't know the source of this, and which I now use as a really convenient excuse, is to drink a cappuccino or a latte or something. In other words, coffee with milk.
Okay.
Because apparently that makes the absorption of the coffee and the caffeine go more slowly than if you whip down a double espresso.
That's fascinating. I've never ever been asked that question, and I'm trying to think with my nutritionist hat on if that is true, because it certainly would not be true in the form of like alcohol. I don't know, but you know what came up for me when you said that? There is evidence to show that dairy in some individuals could increase mucus production. So I know that I try and avoid milk and cheese if I'm going to be speaking a lot, because it does sometimes make me, I suffer from a postnasal drip, so I can get a sore throat if I have too much dairy. But I don't know. I mean, the milk would provide a bit of protein and casein. I might have to look that up.
No, just
Yeah.
But obviously, don't drink a cappuccino after midday anywhere in Europe, because they'll think you're
I know.
just terrible.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And this question has come up already because, Phil, you shared that one of your key performance indicators is to check in with your cholesterol. So are you aware of your health numbers? Because hopefully as a speaker, you have some idea of your business numbers. But what's important here around your health would be, and there's a lot we can test. So I generally would just say the 3 top things that you should keep some sense of awareness on, because they change quickly, and especially when we're under stress. That is your cholesterol, and it's good to know what's making up your cholesterol. So you get good cholesterol and bad cholesterol, so the LDL and the HDL. Your blood pressure, because that's often called the silent killer. So when you have high blood pressure, you don't know that you have it, but it damages your blood vessels very quickly and predisposes you potentially to stroke. And then your blood glucose, which is an indicator potentially of being pre-diabetic or diabetic. And I really can count many instances in my career where people have shared with me how they've had some kind of highly stressful event happen. Perhaps it's a divorce or a death in the family, and then their blood pressure can go up, your blood glucose can go out of sync, and that could impact your risk for heart disease. So it's good to get those kind of things tested, perhaps on an annual basis, just to get a grip on them. And then, of course, not smoking is always a good idea if you want to manage your well-being. Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
In terms of your heart rate, you know, like I have one of these smart watches.
Yeah.
If your heart rate is raised, is that usually a sign that your blood pressure is up as well? Are they linked?
They're not necessarily linked. I have very low blood pressure. So my blood pressure is often, it's sometimes 90/50, which is incredibly low. But I could be exercising, so my heart rate could be high. So no, they're not. So picking up your heart rate is good if you're practicing getting fit. But if you're sitting at your laptop, or if you're presenting a workshop and your heart rate is high, that's not that good. But that isn't directly linked to your blood pressure.
Okay.
But it's great that you've got one of those devices. That is great. Then now we've looked at food and how we eat and hydrating and some health numbers. What about sleep? That's a very important health number. How many hours of sleep did you get last night? Show me.
8. Hang on a minute.
8, 7. Okay. So most of us, and I've done a lot of research on this because it's a personal thing I struggle with. I tend to be an incredibly light sleeper and occasionally have bouts of insomnia. Tara Swartz is a doctor who I highly respect, and I've read many different reports. And the more stressed we are, the more we need to recuperate and get good rest. And most of us should be getting between 7 and 9 hours. If you're interested in this topic, and because today we're not going to go into, I think, in
come with me.
Detail around it.
So that's fine. I thought Dad was at a meeting.
Someone's chatting in the background. I'm just checking who that is. Do I need to mute anybody? There we go. So in terms of getting rest, one of the keys to getting enough sleep is how we go into the hour or two before we get to bed. Who has a digital detox? That means you're off your phones and your laptops for more than an hour before you want to sleep? Let me check. I think there's I'm just going to, I see Alan's gone, so I'm just going to check the chat. Oh, Philip Shaw, thank you. He's just apologized that he's got to leave. Okay. I hope everything's okay. Someone has fallen ill in the house. So having a digital detox can help us to unwind. It also reduces the amount of exposure to stimulating light that we know helps reduce the amount of melatonin that's produced by the pineal gland. So keeping your lights actually around your home quite dim for an hour or two before you go to bed is key. Also looking at things like the temperature in your room. We know that a more cooler room is generally better and more conducive to sleep. And to also then allow yourself, this was a big thing for me. As a speaker, I know, and many of us are switched on and switched up all day. And then you get to 10 or 11 p.m. and then we expect to just switch off, especially if you've traveled. Oh my goodness, if you've got back-to-back travel days with clients and dinners. And my coach once said to me, she said, Celine, why don't you bring in some rest in the day, even if it is 5 minutes or a mindful minute midday and in the afternoon, where you actually tell yourself in your brain that you're giving yourself permission to rest. And that's one of the best things I've done. So, I mean, I now have quite a regular meditation practice. And I find that on the days that I bring in mindfulness, which is the next point on the Wellculator, are the days or the evenings that I find it easier to switch off and drift off into deep rest. So a daily mindfulness practice is any kind of activity that you do on most days of the week that allows you to reflect without any kind of input from a phone or a device. It could be time in nature. It could be, I've got a gratitude journal that I've kept for about 5 years, which is quite thrilling because I'm now in year 5. And so I can see all the other years that I've written things in. And that's how I choose to start most of my days. I sometimes even take my gratitude journal with me when I travel. So when I'm waking up in a hotel room, and this is something that has helped me to create a bit of ritual around traveling, is there's 1 or 2 things that I travel with that I always use at home. And I find that helps me to feel a little bit more grounded. The science behind mindfulness and having practices like gratitude is quite compelling. I know Sean Acor, who's written The Happiness Advantage, and many others have shown how when we spend a bit of time in gratitude and deep appreciation, we can lower the impact of stress. So we reduce potentially cortisol and we can rise levels of oxytocin. So oxytocin is sometimes called the hug hormone. It makes us feel like we belong and there's a sense of trust. So even something as short as 3 or 5 minutes of spending time in gratitude can have a very physical impact on our chemistry and also help us to look out for things to be grateful for. So I'm sure, Sue, in terms of mental health and emotional well-being, that could be one of the strategies that helps people look out for things that are positive despite what may be going on in their lives. Then how's this question? How would you answer? Do you activate and move during your workday? So this is not about exercise. This is about when you're spending a day catching up on emails and writing proposals and doing social media posts and your content strategy. There we go. Are you getting up and stretching? And in fact, let's walk the talk. We're not going to adjourn this meeting, but I invite you to stand up and stretch if you would like to.
Oh, I'd love to.
Yeah. Just shift away from your seat and then come back. And anyone who's familiar with the science of embodiment will know that by moving our bodies, we can become more creative, we can problem solve. I know how when I've stepped away from a proposal that might be difficult to put together, I come back and I've had like a great insight. I'm just so grateful that I didn't send the email or finish it off. Because sitting is the new smoking. You might have seen that as a headline. And as speakers, I find if we're not standing and presenting, we end up traveling. So we're sitting in our cars, we're sitting on trains, we're sitting in planes. And what also helps is if you're able to and you don't have injuries, is to do high intensity interval training. So high intense exercise like skipping or just burpees or press ups for short bursts, like it could be for a minute or two, and then come back to your computer And I find that the oxygen in my system fuels my brain, and I just fire on like more cylinders. Then it is, of course, incredibly important to actually make time to do some form of exercise. So are you doing intentional exercise? What we need is about half an hour of intentional exercise on most days of the week. So it's about 150 minutes a week is what we need, which is where we get the half an hour a day from. And ideally, we should be doing a combination of not just cardio exercise like running or cycling or dancing, but also some weight-bearing exercise. So the older we get, the more important it is to actually do weight-bearing exercise. And that could be, yes, using weights like kettlebells and dumbbells. Can also be using those stretch bands or your own body weight. So if you're doing things like press-ups, and a lot of the CrossFit style training incorporates body weight, that helps to replenish some of the muscle that we generally seem, especially after the age of 40, we seem to lose. But what is key is to not compromise on stretching and flexibility. So something that's helped me when I travel a lot, because I can't get to, yoga and Pilates classes. What I can do though, is I can do 7 minutes of stretching in my hotel room, or 7 minutes of stretching in the morning in my living room. So I came across something called the 5 Tibetan Rites, which I was introduced to by Marc Amerigo. He's a France-based speaker from Marseille. I'll actually share the link to them, because they're a lovely series of exercises that I did. I first discovered them at the PSA Mega Conference. I think that was 2016 in Nottingham. Yeah, because I saw Marc Amerigo. He was outside on the grass and he was spinning around and doing these stretches. And when I asked him what they were, he said, well, it's the 5 Tibetan Rites, and I do them most mornings. And I used those for a long time. What I've now done is I've now incorporated some of my own stretches. But generally, most days of the week, I will do 7 to maximum 10 minutes of stretching in the morning. I find it a very nice way to actually wake up and connect with my body. And I do it while I'm perhaps waiting for the kettle to boil or my coffee to brew. So it doesn't feel like it's an additional thing that I'm adding in. And now, the last point on the Wellculator is this: do you know your response to stress? And generally, are you able to manage it? Oh, there's a little bit of a typo there. To mange it, that means eat in French. So do you know when you respond to stress? I've got a few early triggers. For instance, I clench my jaw. Does anybody else do anything else? I know that when I can feel my jaw clenched, I'm already, because the body generally responds to stress before the conscious mind does. Does anybody
Shoulders
else?
go up.
Oh,
My shoulders up.
a lot of us take
Mine's shoulders as well.
Yeah. So maybe, we've got another 8 minutes or so for the call. Could you allow your shoulders to drop more towards the ground? And then one of the best techniques, besides relaxing my jaw, and I do that by dropping my tongue to the bottom of my mouth and by relaxing my shoulders, is to also use my breath. Because a lot of us, when we're triggered into the stress response, will start to breathe quite shallow. And this makes me think of the one of my favorite quotes from Viktor Frankl, the author of Mankind's Search for Meaning. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. So when we are triggered by a potential stimulus, it can be an email that's come in, a call, the fact that your train's delayed and you might miss a flight. It could be even a thought in your mind while you're lying awake in bed at night. I know that if I can increase the gap between when I choose to respond, I can actually respond rather than react. Because I'm sure we've all done that, where we've said and done something from a place of reactivity. And one of my best techniques is to simply focus on the breath. Does anybody, Sue, Barbara, do you have any kind of breathing technique that you use? Perhaps as a speaker when you're on stage as well?
So I meditate every morning, and then I always do several 1 minute rounds of breathing, and then just check my heart rate here. And I'd also do square breathing as well. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you breathe for 5 or?
Well, what I do is I'd kind of blow out and hold it for about, it could be anywhere between 5 and 10 seconds, and then I breathe in for 5 to 10 seconds, and then I'll hold it for 5 to 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And then breathe out and then hold it again. So it's kind of yeah, I find that really good.
That's a very good technique.
Yeah.
Very good technique. And as a speaker, if I did not have, I actually stuttered as a child. And when I first started speaking, I was quite conscious how when I was nervous, I would stutter a lot more. So I went to a voice coach, and we spent, I think, 6 out of the 10 lessons on just breathing techniques. And I still use them to this day, 25, 30 years on. It's without them, because there's some days, I don't know if you have that, you show up, you feel okay, but there's something that happens, and then you're in the middle of a talk or a workshop, and you can feel the stress response happening. And if I did not tap into my breath, and one of the best techniques is to lengthen your exhale, because when you lengthen and slow down your exhale, you tap into the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the brake. I mean, I'm simplifying it. If Linda watches this as a neuroscience perspective, she might feel like it's a bit too simple. But I find when you lengthen your exhale, you're able to slow down the stress response a lot easier.
The other thing to add to the mix is look straight ahead, keep your head still, look up at the ceiling. That changes your brainwaves.
Oh, absolutely. That's another technique, yeah, because that increases your sense of space and expansion, right?
Yeah, so it's couple that with the shift in body chemistry from breathing differently. The two together are really powerful.
Sorry, Sue, what did you say there? Just look up at the sky.
Look straight ahead. No, keep your head facing forwards, but look up with your eyes. It's the rolling of your eyes in the sockets that changes your brainwaves.
And it calms you down, does it?
Yeah.
It changes from normal conscious waves to the waves of a very light sleep.
And that helps to reduce the stress then, does it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So I've got a very specific technique that sort of couples the change in breathing with the change in brainwave patterns. It's great.
There's Barbara, you might find the work by, thank you, Sue, for that. Wendy Palmer also has a technique that's quite similar, where she gets you to, and she's written a book called The Leadership Embodiment. I'll add the link along with this recording.
Okay, great.
Where she gets you to think of the space above and behind you without looking there. And that's a sense of also giving you a sense of expansion that has been known to help reduce stress.
Thank you.
Right. I would like you to give you a score on the Wellculator. So we've been through the points. I'm going to remind you again. Answer and go intuitively with what comes up. Answer yes if you do this activity most of the time. So 80% of the time, yes gives you 1 point. And if you don't do it, then no point. Got it? Would you say, do you have some kind of strategy to refuel yourself that helps you sustain your energy on most days of the week? If it's yes, 1 point. And if it's no, no point. Then number 2, would you say that you eat like an artist? That means that you have at least 5 servings, and a serving or a portion is that of a tennis ball of colorful foods most days of the week. Yes or no? Yes, giving you 1 point. Would you say that you are a mindful eater? So generally, do you eat your meals without being distracted and perhaps taking 15 or 20 minutes to eat your meals? Do you hydrate enough? So are you having enough water? It can be water or herbal tea, any fluid that is sugar-free or caffeine-free. And I gave you that formula of 1 glass per 10 kilograms that you weigh. Then this one is about your health numbers. So do you know your health numbers, and do you not smoke? Maybe give yourself half and half.
So I was going to say half, yeah.
Yeah, half if you know your numbers and half if you don't smoke. Then do you get enough sleep to wake up rested on most days? So generally, are you waking up feeling rested? Yes or no? Do you have some kind of daily mindfulness practice? No matter how small, something like gratitude, journaling, meditation, time in nature. And then do you activate during your day? So do you avoid sitting? Like, we shouldn't be sitting for longer than 45 minutes at a time, perhaps even not longer than half an hour. So are you getting up and stretching and moving? And do you also bring in intentional exercise? And for this, I'd like to make it half and half a point. So half a point for doing intentional exercise, about half an hour on most days of the week. But the other point is for including some kind of stretching and flexibility. Even if that means 10 minutes of, yoga and downward dog and salute the sun inside a hotel room. And then lastly, do you know when you are potentially stressed? So I mentioned that one of the first signals I feel is I clench my jaw. I also get hangry. And I've got breathing techniques like Barbara has shared and Sue too, that I use to manage it most of the time. So for half and half, do you know when you're triggered into stress? And do you have techniques that you can pull on to help? What do you think the average score on the Wellculator is? I've never done this with speakers only, but generally the average is?
2, I'd say.
Oh, really? Oh no, I'd guess about a 6.
4 to 5. 5 to
Wow.
5, 4. And, you know, Sue, to your point, like, this is not rocket science, but
No.
the reality is that this common knowledge is not common practice.
Mm.
So what do we do? If we want to create new habits, yeah, you can't go from a Wellculator score of 4 or 6 or even 8 to 10 out of 10. The ideal is to pick one thing and make it as simple and easy, because ease is more important than willpower. Very important. Ease is more important than willpower. There are 2 authors that I recommend in this space. So Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg and James Clear, who I've mentioned already, that I'm going to share a link to his article on intermittent fasting. Both reinforce that if you want to create new habits, what helps is to link them to existing triggers, or to be very specific about where and when you're going to do them and make them super easy. So as we wrap up, is there something that you feel, based on what we've spoken about today, that you feel motivated to set a new intention around? And I would recommend that you use one of these 2 phrases. I'll give you an example. After I brush my teeth, so after something that you already do, your current habit, I will drink a glass of water. After I wake up, or after I put my kettle on for coffee, I will drink the water that I've infused the night before, as an example that I shared. Or you could say, I will do the 5 Tibetans at 7 a.m. in my living room. So it's quite important, if you're going to set a new behavior, that it's not just something that you're motivated to do, but that you're very clear and specific about where and when, or attach it to something that you already do. And the key is to keep it simple and easy. Before we wrap up the call, Sue or Barbara, would you like to share if you have something in mind that you would potentially shift and change based on the chat and the time that you've invested today?
Well, one of the things that I constantly seem to be talking about is trying to go to bed earlier.
Yeah.
So tonight now, I'm actually going to go to Pilates tonight, and when I come back, often I go into the kitchen, have a cup of tea. I'm going to go straight up the stairs. I think that's the problem. Once you sit down, then you end up having a cup of tea and watching something on the telly or whatever. So I will tonight, after Pilates, come straight up the stairs, and then I feel so good tomorrow morning. I'll be enthused tomorrow night to not go into the kitchen after being out or wherever I am tomorrow night. So getting more sleep, definitely.
Okay, I love that's clear for you, and I can feel the enthusiasm behind it. I would highly recommend, if you're interested in how to create really short habits, is BJ Fogg, the professor from Stanford that I mentioned. He has a free offering on his website where you go through 5 days of trying his concept called Tiny Habits. Tiny Habits, and he teaches you the importance of making things super easy, and also celebrating them. And a celebration can be something as small as a thumbs up to yourself or a yes, I did it. And when you make things easy to do and you do them, you have positive reinforcement.
Yeah.
You also start changing your identity. You start believing that you are a person that hydrates. You are a person that doesn't watch telly before you go to bed. And that's very powerful stuff. Very powerful stuff. So I'm conscious that we have reached the end of the hour, and I value your time and your input. And I'd love to hear, when I post the recording, Sue, I didn't have a chance to ask you about what you would potentially commit to, but I'm going to share my personal pledge, and I'd like to know how yours goes for you, Barbara.
Oh, I will let you know.
Lovely. Lovely. Thank you very much, lady.
Thank you.
Great stuff. Thanks a million.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.